All right, so for those of you that haven't been participating in the trainings, my name is Candace Coppin. I'm the Quality Assurance and Compliance Officer for the Next Gen program. I also do special projects coordinating. Some of my major responsibilities would be monitoring you all's case files and monitoring you all's programmatic performance outcomes, and then also offering you trainings and updates to the guidances. So today we're going over eligibility requirements. Some of the objectives would be defining WIOA school status requirements a little further so you can understand more about the difference between being in school or out of school. Discussing WIOA eligibility barriers, like the WIOA, specifically WIOA barrier documentation. So we'll go back to those slides, remembering that you had to have at least one of those barriers in order to be eligible. So we'll go over which documentation is acceptable. We'll go more into the requires additional assistance barrier, which is specific to a policy that the Next Gen program puts together. And then, of course, there are a bunch of other documentation that has to happen, not only uploading some other documents like the age requirement and citizenship, stuff like that, but also starting out the VOS account. And of course, tomorrow we will actually have Denise Dixon going over how to start an application in VOS. But I just have a couple of slides on here that just tell you an overall general what you need to have in there in order for you to get started. And the last thing we'll do is learn the steps to collect the low income verification if you need a low income. So starting with school status, you've seen this slide in the last presentation at time of enrollment. And just to reiterate, anything as far as eligibility requirements, they just have to be eligible at time of enrollment. So if it's their age, they have to be the right age at the time that you enroll them. At the time you enroll them means when you have determined that eligibility. You'll notice when you go in VOS tomorrow that you have a number of specific dates. You have an application date, which is when you put the application in. And if you didn't finish the application, then you'll have an eligibility date, which is determining that this person is eligible after this date. And then you have a participation date, and that's when you can start providing services. So your eligibility date is important, and that date and whatever eligibility verification is needed, it will be needed for that date or up to that date. So as long as they're 24 at that date, as long as they're an out of school youth at that date, as long as they live in your county at that date of enrollment, then no matter what happens after, they are still in your program and you can continue to give them services. So to be eligible to participate in WIOA activities, an individual shall at time of enrollment be out of school or in school. So the final rule, that's the CFR, the final rule just has that statement that you must determine the person's school status. That's important. Someone who's out of school is not attending school, okay? And then in this case, school means secondary or post-secondary, and it does not include those adult education programs that are under the WIOA Title II funds, like Youth Build or Job Corps. So the Youth Next Gen program is Title I funding, and the Adult Dislocated Worker program that we have is also Title I, and then we partner with the Title II programs. So the government says that if they're in one of those Title II programs, they're not considered in school, okay? So if someone comes to your program and they're also enrolled in Job Corps, first of all, that's significant for you to know, because you can utilize Job Corps to help you with your services for that person. And then also, you also need to keep in mind that just because they're in Job Corps doesn't mean they're not eligible. They are eligible as long as they're not in some other school programs. And then Title II Adult Education, the full title is Adult Education and Family Literacy Act, AEFLA program, and it's administered by the Education Department if you wanted to look into it further. So just a little bit on co-enrollment. We talked about it a little bit in our last session, but just so you understand, basically, we do have the opportunity to co-enroll participants, which means they would be in your program and they could also be in our adult dislocated worker program. And that's very beneficial because there might be some things that your budget can't, some services that you can't provide because of budget or other issues, like the fact that we don't have ITA right now. And in that case, that person could possibly benefit from certification programs or employment services through the adult dislocated worker program. In order to get co-enrolled, you must submit an email to us at ARC. Marjorie, our director, will contact Phyllis, the adult dislocated worker director, and they'll discuss the participant. They'll discuss where the participant is. The point of this is to see if the participant can produce positive outcomes. If there's a concern that the participant may not produce positive outcomes, they may not approve the co-enrollment, because the whole point is to make sure that you have positive outcomes. Outcome is very important. And if it's going to be a co-enrollment, whatever the performance outcome is, it hits both the youth side and the adult side double. So obviously, if we have someone that could potentially be lost, who's not very serious, who is not always consistent with contacting, then no, that's not going to be a good candidate for co-enrollment. If you have someone that is really on point and has been doing everything you've asked, check into the adult program and see if there's an opportunity for co-enrollment, because they have, the adult program has everything, almost everything that we have. We have more elements like wraparound services, because our young people usually need a little more to have more barriers. But as far as the education services that we provide and the employment services we provide, the adult side does the same thing. They also have work experience and they have supportive services as well. So for school status, for out of school youth, right? You have 4 different possibilities of paperwork that you could pull in, or of different school statuses that you may have to get verification for. One being a compulsory school age but not attending. That means that that person is 16 or younger and they're not in school. They haven't been going to school. So you must be attending school for one whole school calendar. You must not be attending school for one whole school calendar in order to be considered under this category. And what that means is, like, if someone, a school calendar quarter is based on your local schools, right? But if someone attends 1 or 2 days within that calendar quarter, then they're not considered under this category. They have to have completely not attended at all for that whole quarter, for at least one whole quarter, but before they're considered in this category. And honestly, with our Georgia state schools, usually if a student hasn't been attending for a whole quarter, they'll just go ahead and drop them out. So we don't usually have this category of compulsory school age, because the system already signs them out or withdraws them from school. But if you come across a situation like that where they haven't been properly dropped out yet and they haven't been attending for one whole quarter, then you can obtain their school records showing that, and then they would qualify as an out of school youth, or then they would be considered an out of school youth. For dropout, you get a withdrawal form, a dropout form, or school records. And of course, self-attestation is available if you're not able to obtain the school records. And there needs to be, of course, a reason as to why you're not able to obtain them. If someone already has their high school diploma or GED, you would get a copy of that diploma, or a copy of the GED, or you would get the school transcripts to prove that. If someone has already received their post-secondary diploma, you would also get a copy of it or school transcripts. Are there any questions so far before we move on?
No questions in the chat.
All right, great. Brady, what's the time?
10:21.
Thank you. All right. So when we're talking about WIOA barrier documentation, I just wanted to refresh your memory as to what those WIOA barriers are. So if you're looking in the row that says barriers, those are the WIOA barriers, and it is required that you prove that this customer has at least one of these barriers. Okay. So in the next slides, we'll go over what types of documentation you would need for these barriers. So these are good reference slides for you to keep once you get access to the slides, because they really do step through what we consider verified documentation for the barrier. So this is what ARC Next Gen program is accepting as verification for these barriers. Anything outside of that is questionable, and you should email us and ask if it's acceptable before you just upload it. Because what's going to happen moving forward is, as we're monitoring and we see that people are not eligible, or their paperwork is not correct, we're going to start speaking with finance now and actually looking more deeply into misappropriated funds, which, if someone doesn't have their eligibility paperwork in properly, then they're not eligible, and then you're providing services for them with our WIOA funds, even though they're not eligible. So that is a big deal, and we are cracking down on that in the next program year. Let's see. Last session, someone did ask about what documentation was necessary for homeless and runaway, and I was drawing a blank, and I apologize for that. So I did say self-attestation, which is a last resort form of verification. However, you can get other signed documentation from the shelter, or one of the shelters that person might be frequenting, anyone who's providing temporary assistance to that individual, or any social service agency. And typically, if you can get some kind of letter on some type of professional letterhead from whatever agencies or organizations that are assisting the customer, then that would be acceptable documentation. Of course, it needs to be signed, dated, and have that letterhead in order for it to be legitimate. However, if this person is genuinely homeless, like they're not sleeping on anyone's couch, they're not genuinely homeless. That's hard. That was a hard way to say it. I'd apologize. Anybody who's struggling with having a home is homeless. But if someone is 100% homeless, like sleeping on the street, not even going to any shelters, not sleeping on anyone's couch or anything, then you may have to get self-attestation for that. Okay.
Just a quick question about the handout in the file. Once you select the document, you can save. There is an icon at the top of the page to save it to your desktop. Okay.
Okay. So this slide just goes over the additional barriers, but something to keep note of is that the basic skills deficient and English language learner portion are crossed out. And that is because these are only barriers for in-school youth. Well, they are barriers for our customers, but as far as eligible barriers to get into the program, they're only eligible barriers for in-school youth. So all of you who are out-of-school youth providers, you cannot make someone eligible for the program just by proving that they're basic skills deficient or an English language learner. Those are only in the out-of-school youth portion of the program. These two categories are only like additional barriers. They're not main WIOA barriers. And then just to remind you, every time you upload documents or save them, make sure at a minimum you have first initial, last name, and the title of the document. You also seen this slide, so I'm not going to go over it again, but this is just to make sure that when you do go back to this PowerPoint, that you do have this slide in here that explains to you what the requirements are for self-attestation. And I think this would be a good time for us to look at the self-attestation form. So I'm going to segue into that.
Candace, you do have one question. It says, are the forms in the chat downloadable?
Yes, Brittany answered
Yes.
that question just a second ago. Sorry, I'm trying to run the system. Okay. It is. All right, let me know if you're seeing the self-attestation form.
Yes, they
Yes.
are. If you're having difficulty seeing it, there is a shrink icon. You can shrink and enlarge the screen if you are having difficulty viewing it.
And for those of you that are not aware, the people who are talking are the wonderful staff of the Next Gen program, Brittany Oquendo and Denise Dixon. They will be presenting some portions of the training throughout the week. So when they do present, then they'll go more into their title and what they do. But just so you know who the voices are. All right. So with the self-attestation form, this is a new form. And what we tried to accomplish was putting as many items that you may want to self-attest in this form so that it can be utilized for a lot of different self-attestation forms instead of making your own letters. What we saw with the letters was that they weren't detailing out enough the required parts that we needed to be in the self-attestation form. A lot of times the letter would just say, oh, I'm a dropout, and have a signature or no date. Or I'm a dropout and have a person just print their name or something. That is unacceptable. That is not the level of a letter that we need for self-attestation. On that slide, you saw that you have to show why you're not able to get the documents that are needed. It has to be signed and dated. That is very, very important. So as you see here, this form says, only complete this form if you applying for the Next Gen program, you're unable to provide verification due to circumstances outside of your control. So this form is speaking to the customer. The customer, the form then goes on to state, I hereby certify, this is the customer stating that I hereby certify under penalty of perjury that the following information is true. So that's just another extra, hey, this is self-attestation, verifying that what I'm telling to you is correct. And then you can select all that apply. So you can get self-attestation for multiple things. However, if you don't have justification for why you're not able to get those forms, it's not accepted. So if you haven't explained clearly that these forms were not able to be obtained because the document is like missing, or the people, we've tried to contact them multiple times and they've not been able to get back with us, or this document is in a whole nother country or something like that, if there's no explanation, this document will be thrown out and it will not count in your monitoring. Right? I want to keep like pushing that because the explanation is something that we've been missing. So a person in school status, they could be either not attending school and they don't have their GED, or they do have their GED, but they're also not attending school. So for out of school, those are your options. And then some other barriers that we often see with self-attestation would be dropouts, documenting disability. Even though the way we set up the application, you can use the medical disability form as proof of the disability, now that the form is just a little bit more like accurate with names and information on it. But just to be sure, go ahead and get this attestation signed. This is only if their disability is their only main wheel or barrier that you're getting them eligible to the program for. If they have a disability, but you can prove that they're a dropout or ex-offender or pregnant or something like that, then you do not need to get their disability information. Okay, you do want to actually notate that they also have that disability so that it can be understood what all barriers that you'll have to overcome throughout the services. But you don't have to go through them, have to actually give you verification documentation. Someone could be pregnant or parenting and not be able to have that, ex-offender, or in the foster care system. And then also you could be unemployed. And then the whole point is that you have to show income for the 6 months. So that's why it says unemployed and no income for 6 months. So this is a good form for income as well. Like if I've had no income for the last 6 months, you can use this form to have it filled out. Notate in the green box that there is an initials here. I understand that self-attestation should only be used when other acceptable documentation is on a table. So the customer needs to initial there. Then they can type in information as to why they were unable to obtain the verification. And then they need to date it. And then obviously if they're under 18, then their parent is the one who needs to attest to this information. Are there any questions about the form?
The first question is, disability is a barrier. Is there any types of disabilities they are to have, etc., learning or medical?
It can be both. They can be physical disabilities. It can also be, well, here's the thing. If it's the main WIOA barrier, then it needs to be, it could be any of the disabilities as long as you can get proof of that. Any disability you can get proof of, it qualifies. Now, if it's just that they have another WIOA barrier that makes them eligible, but you observe that they have a disability and you want to just keep that observation in mind for like the objective assessment summary and for services and stuff, then it really doesn't matter. You could just see that they have you could just actually just see like that maybe something's up, but it hasn't been diagnosed, and that's good enough. But if it's the WIOA barrier, it doesn't matter. Any kind of disability, as long as it's proven, is acceptable. But like we do have tomorrow, why I'm mentioning it is because tomorrow when you go over VOS, in the application, you'll be asked what are their barriers, and you'll only have to prove one of the barriers, but we ask that you check all the barriers that apply. So if a person comes in and you feel like they might have a disability just based on your conversations with them and stuff, then check the box. But if you check the box, you have to have something in the VOS system that justifies what you're saying. So a case note in that case would suffice.
Okay, you just answered the second question, which was, but do we still check it in VOS that they have a disability, even though it is not what we are basing it on that?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, and the next question is, if the main disability is able to be proven, do we have to get attestation for all of them?
Like for every disability?
Well, the person that asked the question said that you just answered it, so.
Okay.
Never.
Yeah, I think what you're saying is, do you have to get proof for every barrier? And yeah, it's correct. You do not have to get proof for every barrier, just one. Any more questions? No.
No.
Okay. So I'm going to go back to the PowerPoint.
Yes, you can still list all the barriers. But you have to, if you're gonna, have a case note for the other barriers. But the main barrier must have the proof.
Right. So what Brittany said is, if you're listing other barriers on that application, whatever barriers you don't have proof for needs to have case notes in discussing it. We don't put anything in the system that's not justified. All right, let me just change my view or change what screen I'm sharing. Getting the hang of this, guys. Okay. You know what? In the show, go here to where we are. We're moved on to require additional assistance. Boom. All right, so we already went over documentation for those other barriers, right? But you remember you had two barriers that were additional that had some low income verification necessary, and one of those barriers was the requires additional assistance barrier. With this requires additional assistance burial, it's tied to a policy, okay? And the policy is something that the Next Gen program updates. There will be another update to this policy soon, so some of the items in this training module will actually change. But all you have to do is just go into the policy and see what the acceptable barriers are under that policy to determine eligibility, okay? To qualify for the Next Gen program under this barrier that requires the additional assistance barrier, you must require additional assistance to complete an educational program or secure or hold employment and not fall under any of the other out-of-school youth WIOA barriers. So the full statement for requires additional assistance is requires additional assistance to complete an educational program or secure or hold employment. That's why we only say requires additional assistance, because it's very long, and we're really going to start calling it RAA because it's the RAA policy that you'll have to follow. So when you hear RAA, just know it means requires additional assistance to complete an educational program or secure or hold employment. Okay, but it's only if you don't fall under any of the other out-of-school youth barriers. You also must be deemed low income and have income documentation proof. And then you must meet one of the 7 specific barriers outlined in the latest requires additional assistance policy that we provide. Here are the barriers that are under our current policy. You can be unemployed for the last 6 months or left employment at least 3 times over the last year. So I think I remember in the last couple of sessions mentioning that being a possibility. We had an example of someone who had gone through 3 different jobs within the year, but they didn't qualify because they were still in school. You could request assistance in navigating the application or financial assistance process in beginning or completing secondary or post-secondary education. This is acceptable as of now, but the state guidance has changed. So when the next policy comes out, this will no longer be acceptable, like moving forward from the date of that next policy. So for now, though, when we say someone needs assistance in getting into school, they need to come with some proof that they've already started the process. They've already got the ball rolling. So applications, tuition information, their financial aid form, something like that is what they would need to bring in as proof that they really need help getting into school. And if so, then they would fall under the RA policy for now. You can be currently attending or request assistance attending alternative education institutes designed to serve at-risk youth or not allowed in mainstream institutions, or who have been determined by the community as needing special attention. So if someone is attending alternative school, they're an in-school youth, so they won't qualify for your program. But this requires that this assistance policy is for in-school and out-of-school youth. So that part where it says currently attending does not apply to you. All right. But if they come in requesting to get into alternative school, which essentially means that they probably are dropout or not attending, then they would probably qualify under the dropout or compulsory age category. But there may be some details that I'm unaware of, and if so, they could possibly come in here as an at-risk person who just need help getting into school. The difference between this one and the one above is that school system being high school. So the one above is about getting into college. The one after that is about high school. But like I said, those two are most likely to change a little because, like I said, the state has put out some more guidances. However, how it works is because our policy, because we do dictate policy for the Next Gen program, you must follow our policy. And your justification is that at the time the policy said XYZ. Okay. And then if I were you in case notes, I would say per RAA policy, this person qualifies under this category. And then put your justification or whatever documentation that you were able to get. The person could be court involved or at risk of being court involved. So instead of just being an offender or an ex-offender, They could be on their way. They could be in the process of, maybe not in jail yet, but they have a court date. They could have incarcerated parents, so they're not in jail, but one of their parents is. Or they could have been in the foster care system at some point, or some kind of related system to the foster care system. And also, I like the last one because it involves anyone who has substance abuse problems or history of substance abuse. So what this means is, like, you have someone who comes into your program, and they're not a dropout, they're not an ex-offender, they're not any of these other things, right? But they have substance abuse issues, and you know that because you've talked to them about it. So if they're willing to give you some type of documentation to prove that, then as long as you're able to determine that they are low income as well, then they can qualify for the program. And when you put in documentation, once again, for requires legit assistance, you're going to label that document as the RAA verification to be sure that we see that. And then in your objective assessment summary and case notes, you should be clearly stating why this person, like, qualifies under the requires legit assistance barrier.
You have a question. What about was foster care now adopted?
Oh, yeah. So, yeah, because the regular WIOA barriers state that you have to be in foster care or have aged out of foster care. So once being in foster care and then being adopted would put you under this requires legit assistance barrier. And if that's the only thing that you can prove for them to get into program, then you would just have to also prove that they're low income, and then they would qualify. Did you have another question, Brittany?
Yes. For abuse problem, can they provide self-attestation form?
For what?
Abuse. I'm guessing
Oh,
domestic or
yeah. Yes. But once again, you're gonna have to justify, like, why you're not able to get that information in any other way, because you can get a statement from a counselor, or if they've been in some type of program to help them with their abuse, they went into some type of 30-day, or if they go to some steps program and they have a sponsor or anything, like, you get a letter from the sponsor, or if you can pull up some records for them, then that is, of course, primary. So when you're justifying why you're using self-attestation, you need to point out why there aren't any of those other documents available. And honestly, if it's a situation where the person's just sensitive to talking about their substance abuse, then they may not be suitable for the program, simply because we focus on certain target populations, and we want them to, like, have one of the main WIOA barriers. And then if they don't have any of those other main WIOA barriers, then we're, like, squeezing them into the program under this requires additional assistance policy. So I want to make sure that if they're being put in the program, it's because we have clear evidence that they need this assistance. It shouldn't be a situation where maybe you talk to them and maybe they kind of mention that they have substance abuse issues. That would not be enough to get them into the program. They would have to be able to show us some type of substantial proof, or really the letter would have to basically confess that they feel like they have substance abuse issues themselves. And some people don't want to do that, so that's why they may not qualify, because they may not want to go into that much detail about their disabilities or their issues. So I did already tell you in the last presentations about the limitations for this. Specifically, it goes to in-school youth. With in-school youth, they can only have a small percentage of people who are under this policy. We don't have that 5% on our out-of-school youth, but that's because for in-school youth, I think it's easier to qualify them for the program, because you can be qualified as a basic skills deficient, English language learner. Those are easy. ways to qualify someone. So we feel like maybe they don't need to be under this policy, while you may have more participants in the out of school youth program who do need to fall under this policy. So there's no limitation for that. And then that other limitation is about income. So the over income exception is basically saying that out of everyone that's required to be low income, which is anyone who's in the anyone who falls under the RAA policy is required to be low income. Anybody who's in in-school youth is also required to be low income. So we'd have to put all the numbers of our in-school youth. We're not recruiting for them, but we do have in-school youth. So we'd have to calculate all the numbers for our in-school youth, calculate how many people we have in RAA under the out-of-school youth, and then compare that to how many participants we have altogether, and it should only be 5% of them that fall under the RAA that are over income, which means that they could be under the barrier that requires them to be low income, but then get approved as over income. So the whole point is that, like, there really aren't any barriers. There's ways to get around everything. You just have to have proof of it. Okay, if they don't have one thing, then they might have to have two things instead. You know, if you don't have your passport, then you can have your driver's license and your social security number. It's like the same thing. All right, if you're not out of school, if you're not a dropout or an ex-offender or something, then never fear. As long as you can prove you're low income, then we could possibly get you in the program as something else. And it's like, oh, well, you might be over income. Well, that's okay. Hold on, because we might still be able to get you approved. We just have to go through a little bit more steps. All right, so there really shouldn't be too many reasons that you have to turn people away. So when would a client need to be registered under the requires additional assistance barrier? Just want to give you some examples because I know it can kind of get complicated when you get to this level. For out of school youth, an out of school youth with a high school diploma that does not fall under any other barriers, and then they don't test basic skills deficient because you have to be basic skills or ELL, but also hasn't been able to keep jobs this whole year. So the fact that they haven't been able to keep a job this whole year is what prompts you to say, well, that falls under the requires additional assistance policy. They didn't qualify under the other barriers. They weren't basic skills deficient, but they have been having issues with jobs. So then at that point, you can say, okay, great. As long as I prove that they're low income, then we can move forward. For in-school youth, I have an example on here. Of course, it doesn't apply to you. But if you're trying to finish high school and you don't follow any of the other barriers, but you've been in and out of trouble through the year and have been advised by a counselor to locate an alternative school to finish out the school year, that is a good example of someone who needs your assistance because they've been told that this is not going to work and they need to find something else. Are there any questions about requires additional assistance? The policies will be available to you along with the training PowerPoints at the end of the sessions.
No current questions.
And the policies haven't changed, by the way. So we only have one provider that's new, and I could actually send that provider the policies now. Everybody else has the same policies from before. The requires additional assistance policy has not changed yet. So all policies are the same, but I only have one provider that may not have access to all of them, and we can get that for you. All right, proper VOS documentation. Can you tell me the time?
1 second. The time is 10:50, but we do have another question. It said, I thought basic skill deficient did not qualify for out of school youth.
Yeah, you're right. Oh, no. Okay, let's go back. See? It gets confusing. All right, because I think I know where we're missing things. Let me go back to this chart right here. Look at the barriers section. All right. Can I use a spotlight? Okay. The barrier section here. For out of school youth, you have these barriers, and the in-school youth have similar barriers, but they also have English language learner, and basic skills deficient as an option for the main barriers. Okay, so that's English language learner. So when I say out of school don't qualify under that, I mean they don't qualify as a main WIOA barrier under here. However, one of the main WIOA barriers is saying for out of school youth is saying if you have your high school diploma already, then you must also have these other things, okay, including income verification, because there's an asterisk there. So someone who comes into the program that doesn't qualify under any of these other barriers would then have to prove that they're low income. If they have their high school diploma already, I mean, you're assuming under both of these, they might have their high school diploma already, because if not, then they would be a dropout. So they already have their high school diploma, then you need to go on further to prove that they might be basic skills deficient or an English language learner. If they are not basic skills deficient, then you may have to go further to prove that they can fall under the RAA policy. So BSD, basic skills deficient, is like additional barrier. It's not a main WIOA barrier. Did that help? I hope that clarified.
Thank you.
All right. 2 more sections, proper documentation, and then we'll go into low income and we'll be done for the day. So the steps to filing your documents in the VOS system. 1, you're collecting your documents. Okay, collecting all of them. You need that next in application. You need an eligibility checklist. You need all the identification and employment eligibility stuff, like their ID and citizenship and residence, all that we talked about. You're going to take all those files and you're going to scan and save them electronically on your desktop or wherever you store your files. And you're going to save them at least first initial, last name, document. If you put other stuff in it, that's fine. You might want to put dates, whatever works for your filing system, but you must have at least first name, last name, and the title of the document. Okay. And the reason why you're putting them on your computer ready to go is because while you're doing your VOS application, which you'll learn more about tomorrow, you'll be linking those documents to the application. There are certain documents that need to be linked to the application, like that that selective service registration. Selective service needs to be linked to the application in VOS. So you got to have all those documents on your computer already, so you can go ahead and link them. And then there'll be some additional documents that may not need to be linked to the application, but they also need to be uploaded. So everything that you have will need to be uploaded. You can upload documents first. Well, see, the thing is you can't upload the documents until you started the application. So if you're going to start the application, you might as well go through the whole application. And if you're going to do that, then you might as well go ahead and have the documents ready to go. Okay, so that's why the steps are the way they are. Put the documents together, upload them to the system, start your VOS application. Once you finish the application, you'll get a participation date, and then you will be uploading those other documents to VOS, right? So the first step was scanning the documents into your computer. Then the next step would be uploading those documents to VOS. After that, you have some mandatory activity codes, which the activity codes represent the services that you provide. So you'll have an activity code for GED. That represents that you're providing the service of GED. This person is getting GED services from you or your community partner. So there are some mandatory activity codes that you must put in right away. And then there are additional activity codes that you will use as you're going along. As you get a new service, you put in new activity codes. If you're going to give them a work experience, there's an activity code for that. If they're getting a certification, there may be an activity code for that. Okay. And then the last step is preparing for the objective assessment summary and the service plan. So this whole time while you were doing the intake process, you were building your objective assessment. But like I said in the intake process session, you may not be complete. It may not be complete because you may still have to do the career assessment. So you have a little bit of leeway as to having that complete summary done. It doesn't have to be done before enrollment. It can be done within 30 days of enrolling the person. And then you'll use that summary to complete the service plan, which that initial service plan, the service plan will change, but the initial service plan needs to be in that system, signed and dated by that participant within the first 30 days of the program. This is good to keep in mind when you're just deciding what your program design will be, because if you need more time to assess a person before you put together their service plan, you may want to consider doing those things prior to enrollment. And we've said before that financially you are allowed to provide small assessment type services, observation type services to the participant or to the customer before they're enrolled as a participant. You may have some customers who need who can get their documents, but it may cost like $5 or something. Or I've heard where some customers don't have their social security card and you can pay for that. Or if you want to do a small workshop, if you want to have them attend a workshop for a few days a week for a month, you can do that without them even being enrolled in the program. Okay, so get all your assessment stuff together because you got 30 days after they've been enrolled to get that service plan together. These next couple of slides are good reference slides for the verification documents for for what is allowable documentation to verify some of these other eligibility requirements, like citizenship. You have to prove that you can work in Georgia, in the U.S. and in Georgia. You have to prove that your age, your residency, etc. And we have here some ideas of what can be proof. We'll go more into low income verification, so I'm not going to go into that right now. But I put these slides in here so that you can print them and put them up and use them as a reference. So a little bit more into to the steps. When you upload all eligibility documents and label them properly, these are the documents that will need to be uploaded. So you have a reference right here. When you get this PowerPoint, you'll be able to look at this to make sure that you have everything. The latest grievance procedure, immigration affidavit, selective service, and you see it says signed orientation form because remember, orientation must go along with the form that must be signed. Where it says proof of major WIOA barrier, that's referring to being a dropout or ex-offender, pregnant, disabled, etc. You're going to upload your pre-tape scores, okay? And Denise is going to go over that with you. Everyone must be taped. All pre-tape scores must be uploaded. If someone is considered basic skills deficient, which means they score under 9th grade level on the tape, then one of the services or one of the requirements for performance is measurable skills gain. And we'll talk about performance requirements further, but measurable skills gain, it is what it sounds like. It's literally measuring gains in your skills throughout the program. So you're like, if you're doing a certification during the program and you have like a midterm to just see where you are midway through your certification, then that will be considered a measurable skills gain because it's the opportunity to see where you're at even though you haven't completed anything. So one of the measurable skills gains that we do is an increase in the TABE score. That can be a measurable skills gain. It shows that you've improved somewhere. So a good excuse to use the TABE for measurable skills is like GED, because right now measurable skills does not really track GED progress. So you can't put in measurable skills performance that that the person has passed one of the 4 subjects. That's not one of the measurable skills requirements, okay? So in order to prove that this person has improved their math, science, or their math and their reading categories, you could tape them again. And by taping them again, you show that they've made improvements there until you're able to get their GED records. The fallback is that the tape is time consuming. The test is. So you may not be able to do that, and it's not a requirement, but having a measurable skills gain for that program year is a requirement. So you may be forced to take a person twice simply because you need to show that they've gained some type of skill. Assigning those activities, 412, 413, and 417 are the mandatory activity codes. 412 is the objective assessment, which you started doing even before you enrolled them, and you will continue to do not only to complete the objective assessment summary, but it's also an ongoing assessment, objective assessment. You're continuously assessing your participants' progress. So that is an activity that just stays open the whole time. Like you never close it until you're done with that file completely when that person's been exited. Also developing that service strategy. The service strategy is the service plan. That's another activity code that stays open the whole time because the service plan is a living document that will be updated, reviewed regularly. And then 417, comprehensive guidance and counseling. That's something that you do all the time, just as a case manager, as a career advisor. So that's another activity code that stays open even after you've exited the participant because they are going into follow-up and you'll be doing comprehensive guidance and counseling even in follow-up. You keep your that activity code open as well. And Denise goes in and
You have a question,
does whatever she needs to
Candy.
do.
Hey, you have a quick question. What if the participant takes a GED pretest the first time, but needs to take it a second time and scores higher? Would that be considered a MSG?
No, it's not. Under state guidance, there's no way to track progress on the GED. They don't allow that. The only thing that would qualify under measurable skills gain would be completing the GED.
Right. So then another question follows up with that measurable skill gain. Are we going to be able to talk about measurable skill gains in more details at some point, such as what can we use as a measurable skill gain?
Most definitely. In the performance requirements section, which is next week, we will go over measurable skills gain in detail.
Okay.
And for those of us who have already been putting measurable skills gain in, no panic. We're not going back and changing anything. We're just going to move forward with details on how to move forward. That's it.
Okay. And a question about this current information. Is activity code 417 standard on the case notes? That's the question. I don't believe that it's on the case notes, but it's a standard required activity in the introduction.
I'm not sure I understand what the question is.
Yes, can you clarify your question a bit more, please?
I think that when you do the VOS training tomorrow, if you're not familiar with VOS, then it will be clear, more clear, because the activity codes are in a different section than case notes. So that's why I'm confused about the question.
She said only because you said as an advisor we give counseling.
So what does that have to do with the case notes, though?
Yeah, it's not. For the person asking the question, it's not relevant to the case notes. It's just a required activity code.
Yeah, I mean, it is relevant to case notes because every 30 days you're putting in case notes about the status of the participant. So at that time is when you're going to discuss more in detail the types of guidance and counseling that you have provided. So definitely it is related to the case notes. And that's where you're going to put all that information because the activity code section, it only allows you to put the code in. It doesn't allow you to put any details. I mean, there's a comment section in there, but you don't see it on the main screen. So there's no point in putting any details in the activity itself. You're definitely going to want to put in that activity. And then as you're doing your 30-day case notes, you'll be talking about those guidance and counselings.
Yes, they said that's what they meant. You have another question. If we are waiting to put in the official GED scores into the measurable skills game, wouldn't measurable skills wouldn't be considered a credential at that point?
Repeat again.
If we are waiting to put in official GED scores into the measurable skills, wouldn't be considered a credential at that point?
Yes. So something that we'll discuss when we go into measurable skills game is if someone has completed a credential, you're not going to go into the measurable skills game tab to put that information. You are going to go into the credential tab like you've been doing. But when the state pulls the reports, they pull the report from the measurable skills tab, the TABE score tab, and also the credentialing tab. So they will know that a credential was attained for the year as long as you put it in that tab.
Okay, no more questions.
Good questions, guys. It will get clear, a little more clear for you as we go along, because the way we're doing this training is like you're getting overviews and then you're getting it broken down. This is also so that like if you have new staff coming in later, like you can give them introductory information without overwhelming them with too much information at the beginning.
Plus, everything overlaps, so you're going to get a little here, a little there, then we'll piece it all together for you.
Yeah, a lot of overlapping, but I think that's best because it's like repetition is what'll help you learn. Okay, yeah. So then after you do the mandatory 412 and 413 and 417, you're going to have at least one education or training activity. Okay, that person's either going to be getting a GED or they're going to need basic skills training or something like that. So you should have at least an additional activity that you put in the system for this participant. At least one, okay? But essentially, you're taking your objective assessment, you're building that service plan, and every single service that is going to be rendered for that participant should have an associated activity code. So definitely every goal in your service plan should have an activity code, but work experiences, supportive services, all the 14 mandated elements all have associated activity codes. And we run reports showing those activity codes the state uses those activity codes to show what services you've been providing. So if you're providing a laundry list of services to someone and you don't have any activity codes in the system, it's almost like it doesn't count. Like you didn't do any of those services. Okay, so please get in the habit of those activity codes. And tomorrow when you're involved, you'll see what that looks like. And then when you're at the next step of preparing to develop that service plan, you'll need that objective assessment summary, your career assessment that you did, and then you're going to want to meet with your participants so you guys can create that plan together. Any questions about the steps? The steps to proper documentation. As you can see, there's a number of things that you need to have. You need to have a lot of documents at the onset. There's 10 documents here, or not even including that there's like 4 documents. So there's like 13 documents here that you'll have to have. Plus, once you actually go into the system, you have to do these additional things. And this is starting the file. This is at the beginning of your file. And then from that point on, you're just doing ongoing. You're adding activities as needed. You're uploading documents as needed. And you're putting in case notes regularly and updating the service plan. So the last section for today is low income verification. Once again, for out of school youth, low income verification is rare. There's not that many people that fall under that. And we've talked a little bit about who falls under that. But now we'll go into like, if you do have to get verification for low income, what are the steps? How can you do this so that it's not like too stressful? And then I do want to look over the low income verification document and just show you some of the other documents, but not go over them, but just show them to you. So for out of school youth, when is low income documentation necessary? that first line with the asterisk next to it was someone who already has their high school diploma. So we've already gone over this. I'm not going to continue unless you have further questions about it. But if someone comes in and they've got their high school diploma already, then they must qualify under the other barriers. And if they don't qualify under the other WIO barriers, then you have to go through this process to get them qualified for the program. If for whatever reason they're not able to qualify under basic skills deficient or English language learner, you have a secondary process that you can use under the RAA policy. So these are the two areas for out of school youth where you may have to provide income verification. We won't go over the approvals of the low income exception anymore because we've done that. Okay, so some points to consider. Okay, so now you have done all your eligibility requirements and you realize that this person needs to provide their low income documentation. So the first question is, which low income parameter does the customer fall under, right? So there are some parameters that they could fall under. They could be in a high poverty area, which is based on the census tract. The state decides like what these high poverty areas are based on the 30% low income status or something like that they use. We have a map that will help you figure that out. So I'll show you that in another slide. For in-school youth only, there's an option of free and reduced lunch program. So for the in-school youth people, if someone's in high school and they qualify under the free reduced program, then that proof of that qualification could be your proof of low income status. But of course it's crossed out because it's only for in school. And then based on age and living status, you could determine whether the customer is dependent, independent, or emancipated. Because at this point, if they're not in the high poverty area, then you may have to look at their actual income. And if they're living with a family, then you have to consider everyone that's in that household for income. So it's important to define whether they are a dependent, independent, or they're emancipated to prove that you only need to look at their income and not their whole family's income, because their family or the people who live with them do not help support them, right? And then also a person with a disability can also be considered a family of one. So if you're able to prove that they have a disability, then you can also only utilize their income to prove that they're low income. But that's kind of catch-22, because if someone has a disability and you can prove it, then you don't need low income because they qualify under disability. Okay. And then the next question would be, what documents do you need to collect? And what documents need to be uploaded to VOS, right? So which parameter do they fall under? Which are the documents that need to be collected? And what documents need to be uploaded? Because you're going to collect documents, and then as a career advisor or a case manager, you're going to decipher through those documents to figure out what's necessary for the system. So like I said, the first step is to determine if they're in the high poverty area. Why is it the first step? Because it's the easiest way to prove that someone's low income, and you don't have to ask them for any documentation. You don't have to ask them for pay stubs or their tax forms or anything like that. You just have to look up their address in the system. So that's something that you could do without even talking to them to see if they fall under the high poverty area. This map is a Google map that was set up by the state, like the IT department of the state put together this map. It still works. So we're going to open it so you can see what it looks like. But when you open the link, you're going to put the address in, and as you can see, there's blue area represents high poverty. So anything outside of the blue area is not high poverty. But if there's a little ping inside the blue area, then that person is considered high poverty. All right, so give me a second. Let's see. Change my view so you can see it. Give me a second. Oh, good. There we go. Okay, so as you see, all the blue are high poverty areas, and this is Gwinnett right here that we're looking at. That's all Gwinnett up there, and they have high poverty areas. As far as our counties, the high poverty areas are mostly in Clayton and Gwinnett. That's where the high poverty areas are. So if you're going outside of that, you may not find as many high poverty areas based on the state's 30% thing or whatever. That's how they dictate high poverty. So up here, you can't really see it well, but there is a little icon, search icon right here under the high. I don't know why it's like the word is right on top of it, but the search icon is what you click on. Click on the icon. Let's see. I'm trying to make sure I find a high poverty area address. Click on the address that pulls up, and then so you can see that this address is in a high poverty area because it's very blue. Now, when it's time to prove this, how we want you to document this is you're going to need to zoom out, okay? Because what we want to be able to see is that clearly that this blue area is high poverty area, and you can see that clearly when you zoom out, okay? Don't zoom out so much that you can't barely see the dot though. You know, even though I can still see the dot. So if you zoom out this much, I can still see the dot, so it's fine. But the little red dot is the address, and this is clear proof that the person's in the high poverty area. You're going to go to your snipping tool or whatever you use to screenshot. You're going to take a screenshot of the image. Right? We have snipping tools, so that's what I'll use. Screenshot this image. Boom. Make sure when you screenshot the image, though, that you're capturing not just the ping and not just the picture, but you're capturing the address too, because we shouldn't have to assume anything. And just looking at a picture of a map with a red dot on it does not tell me the whole story. So definitely make sure that you're snapshotting the whole image with the address so that it shows that I looked up this address and it's in high poverty area. Where's my mouse? Okay.
Someone said hit show on map and print, and it will give you everything you need.
Oh, great. So y'all hear that? You hit show on the map and it'll get everything you need. Okay. And when you save it, you're gonna save it first initial last name, high poverty area proof, high poverty area verification, HPA. Any of those count. We know what HPA means. Any questions about looking for high poverty area? There is another way to do it that's very much more complex, where you go in, you have a list of census tracts. We can provide it for you, a list of census tracts, and then you go into like the Census Bureau website and you can go and look up the tract and then like go backwards from there and see if the address falls within that tract. This Google site has been up since April of 2018 and it's still active and it's still working properly. So as long as it's working properly, we'll continue to do it this way. Now, if they're not low income, if they're not in a high poverty area, then now you're having to go in and look at someone's income. Okay, and it's the gross income for 6 months. That includes wages, salaries, anything that they're getting in rents. and whatever the other family members receive during that 6 months. Okay. The case manager determining eligibility must decide whose income should be calculated. So which people are in the household are considered family. Okay, so on the application, there's a section that asks you like who's in your household and how much money do they make. The participant or the customer at the time, they're gonna write down everybody that's in the house and the relationship to them. And they probably don't have the income for them yet, but at least they'll have everyone who's in the house and the relationship to the customer. At that point, you're gonna have to determine, based on the definition of family, which is in the next slide, who all in that household income needs to be gathered and calculated for this low income guideline. Okay. And then you'll collect the income documentation. You'll calculate it for the family for 6 months. And there is a form that you will use from the Next Gen program for that. And then you'll upload that low income verification form. And we're going to look at that. So what is a family? Okay. A family, according to the guidance, is 2 or more persons related by blood, marriage, decree of court, or living in a single residence. So you have a married couple and their children. You have the parent guardian and their dependents, or you can have a married couple, period. So in that case, it sounds like if you have your whole family living in the house, let's say your mom and dad live there, your grandma lives there, your auntie and uncle live there, and your cousins all live there. Well, based on this, your family is more that immediate group of people, and their dependents, whoever the dependents are. So now if your mom and dad are literally supporting everyone, then everyone counts. They're all dependents under the married couple, under the guardians. However, a lot of times mom and dad aren't supporting auntie and uncle necessarily, and cousin. They're just there, living there. Maybe they're providing rent and everything too, and they're supporting themselves. So in that case, you're looking at auntie, uncle, cousin, and you're like, okay, well, if they have income and they're supporting themselves, then you don't have to consider those people's income. You just want to get mom and dad, and you might want to get grandmas too. You're going to need to get grandmas and the customer, because grandma is a dependent. Now, if grandma is not a dependent, then that's a factor to consider. But you have to decide who is in that family is actually needs to be calculated. Who is in that household that actually needs to be calculated in the income. And be mindful that we see all the documentation. So we can see all the names that the customer put on their application. And we're going to be looking for your justification on whose income you selected. So it does have to follow the, the regulations, and you will have to show your justification. For persons with a disability, or if you figured out that that person is a non-dependent, then you can look at them as a family of one. And we already talked about the fact that if they are able to prove that they have a disability, then the family of one thing is not even a factor, because they already eligible under WIOA. But I mean, they could decide that they don't want their disability to be a part of their WIOA barrier for whatever reason. They don't want to give you proof of that, and but you know that they have a disability, and because they don't have proof of anything else, that you have to get them into the program based on low income. And so if that's the case, you can look at them as a family of one, and then you could take whatever their SSI, whatever their benefits are, and calculate those benefits for 6 months, and look at the income chart based on one person, right? Let me go back to that. See, so if they're a person of one, or if they're a family of one, then you're calculating their income for 6 months. And if there's only one person in the family, then they have to be making less than $6,444 to be in 6 months to be considered low income. Okay, so it definitely matters how many people are in the family when you're determining the low income status. And this just details out some of the definitions to determine if someone's independent, non-dependent, or emancipated. So within a family, at some time during the last year, the participant is paying reasonable, significant part of their own way. There's no set minimum limit. and we do have that head of household form that can be used, that's going to be the best way to prove it, because the head of the household is the one saying that this person lives with me, but I don't support them fully. Or this person lives with me and they don't pay rent, but they pay for everything else. Like they pay their own food and transportation and everything else that they need. And the only thing I give them is the rent. A person can have multiple or varying residents during a significant part of time. That person could also be kind of like homeless, hopping around and stuff. Possibly, if they have multiple homes, they could be considered homeless. So you may be able to catch them in a barrier, the WIOA barrier for homelessness. But they could not want to say that they're homeless. So if they've been moving around or having a lot of varying residents, another example would be someone that moves around with their family a lot. So they're not homeless, but they're just constantly having to move because their family is moving. Or if they're away from the household on special projects, if they've been institutionalized for a long period of time, then that person can be considered independent simply because their family unit has not been supporting them. And then if that person has demonstrated parental or soon to be parental or husband-wife responsibilities, even though in living quarters of another household, they can be considered independent. So that's another reference where it's like maybe instead in that example I just gave with the family, maybe it's the uncle or aunt trying to get into the program. Sorry, maybe it's the cousin trying to get into the program. And the cousin's older, so maybe they do a lot of parental stuff in the house, maybe, or they are about to get married, so they're preparing for that and spending money on apartments and stuff with their couple, with their partner or whatever, but they're still in the house, you know, but it looks like they're transitioning into like being individual. That if you document that, then you can consider that when you're doing their low income verification. And that's important because it will possibly reduce the amount of people that are in the home. Could hurt or help depending on how much money those people make. And then you have some includable or excludable income, and that list changes or it grows. The income inclusions are based on WIOA Title I definitions. WIOA Title I is us and dislocated worker program. Listed in the United States Department of Health and Human Services property income level and USDOL 70% lower living standard income levels. Okay, so it's based on all those factors. Okay, and it changes a little bit. We do send out guidances. If I click on this right here, okay, this site is an old site that we've been using. A lot of you all have this site. You can copy this URL right now and go to the site. The only people who might not have it are my new providers. But this site is mainly for the adult dislocated worker program. They utilize this site the most. It's good though to keep this site on hand because they oftentimes update, you know, policies and guidances and stuff on the site. So if you want to see what the latest policy is, or not latest policy, but like the latest guidance from ARC level from the Workforce Development Board, or if you want to see the eligible training provider list, the most updated one, you would go here for that. Okay. So all these ARWDB forms, these are the adult dislocated worker forms. They're not for the next gen. Okay. But you do see that they have TABE study guides and TABE information. Like we use the same TABE as they do. So these type of guides can be used. You can utilize them as well. You know, if you click on these guides, this training, it will help you learn 1112 TABE. So just be mindful that if it's a form that you clicked on, that it may not be a next gen form. It will say next gen on it if it is a next gen form. in those, so we don't use those forms. But any of the guidances here, you could definitely use. And then I have gone ahead and updated some of the latest forms. All these here that you see that say Next Gen forms are new and updated and ready to go. So you can go on this site, you can click on here, you can see the application and see the self-attestation form, low income, and objective summary. All that stuff is there. And as the weeks progress, you will start seeing all the other forms popping up, like the work experience forms and the exit forms, etc. They will pop up here. We are already in the process of having our own website put together. So it's going to be similar to this, look similar to this, but it's just going to say Next Gen policies and forms up here instead of being all of them. And then if you scroll down further, there's tons of policy and procedure. These are just general though. These are not Next Gen policies. But like the rapid response policy, that's everybody's policy. So anything that's Next Gen says Next Gen on it, it's very clear and you won't be confused. But there's like criminal record policies and stuff that are just general policies, and we tend to follow the adult side. What they do, we mirror each other. Like we make sure that we're on the same page with a lot of things. So the only thing I really like stay away from is specific policies, knowing very well that we have our own, and any of their forms. Stay away from their forms. But if you scroll down further, these SDA instructions are the instructions that come from the Atlanta Regional Workforce Development Board, which is our board, okay? And they put out these SDAs kind of on a regular basis. So you'll notice that the income chart that I have in my PowerPoint now is here. The latest one is right here. The newest equal opportunity policies and procedures is here. And this is a good place to go to look for it, because the adult dislocated worker program is who puts together the equal opportunity policy, and they're the Phyllis is the one that you would contact if you wanted to complain or go through the procedures. So this site is good for any updated policies like that. It also has the Babel notice, which needs to go on top of your applications, go inside your tape books, anywhere that someone needs to be able to read something thoroughly. You're going to want to put this Babel notice there, just so you have to see what it looks like. For those of you who have never seen the Babel notice, it is a statement written in multiple languages. And see this ain't even, oh, I'm about to say, okay. So first you'll see the SDA guidance statement, and then when you scroll down, you'll see the actual notice. Okay, the notice is in English here, and then it's all the different languages moving down. And basically this notice, when they see this notice, someone who's struggling with English or needs help reading English or something like that will know that they can get assistance, and they'll know how to go about getting that assistance, even though they may not be strong in English. Okay, so you put that on the front of your application so that anyone who's struggling with English can see it right away. The EEO poster is up here to print out, because everyone needs those in there. It's required for you to have those in your offices. Okay, so this is a great reference site. And for now, it is your only reference site, because it literally has everything. And it literally has everything that we have to offer at this moment. But like I said, when we get all our documents up, we're going to transfer them onto our own page. But you're going to still want to have this page, because they put general policies and general guidances and stuff on this page that you're going to want to have, that you're going to want to reference regularly. Okay. So let's see. So what I'm going to do now, say what?
Time check is 11:34.
Oh, okay. So we're about finished. I just wanted you to look at these forms. So take some time on your own to go through the forms. And if you have any questions, you can follow up with email, and we'll clarify any of your questions. We'll put them, we are compiling every question that's being asked. So if you send us an email with the questions, we will add those questions to the Q&A, and we plan to put the Q&A on our site as well, so that we can always refer back to those questions. But I just wanted you to see the low income verification is slightly different now. Here, this section gives you the other options of how someone can be determined low income. If you're looking at their if you're having to look at their finances, then you can use their food stamps, their TANF, or their SSI benefit for their finances. Okay, and there's some other things that you can use their finances, and then you'll see here where you've determined that they're an independent, and you still have to do their income calculations, or if they're a family of one, you still have to do like income calculations. So if you're having to pull documents and calculate like a pay stubs and stuff, you need to use the income calculation, which is down here. So here at this point, you would take all the people that were in the household, but that will be calculated for the family. They go here. You should calculate that income here, and it's going to be for 6 months. And then this is where you would actually show your work, like however many pay stubs plus whoever's tax forms times 6 or whatever, or divided by 2, and you get your number. All right, and then there are a number of pay methods that you can use, but basically it's a little bit of common sense. It's like if you get a pay stub for 2 weeks, right? If you get 2 pay stubs that represent a month's worth of income, then of course you're going to calculate that. You're going to add those 2 pay stubs together and then multiply that by 6, right, to get your number. Or you may get a tax record, and if that's the case, then that's going to be the whole year's taxes. So then you would divide that in half. So that's all it's saying. The pay method is just saying whatever information you have, it needs to be compiled and calculated for 6 months of income. And then you'll see you can print in date digitally, but you have to sign it by hand, or like we discussed in the last sessions, you can use your DocuSign. If you want to load these forms into DocuSign, you can utilize that as well. All right.
There is a question. What if some family members, like aunt or grandmother, do not want to give their social security number?
As far as you compiling documentation for income, you don't have to give social security number. Only the participant needs to have their social security number. If you're talking about here where it says last 4, that's just the last 4. You don't need it. You don't need it. So if they don't want it, fine.
Okay, so the next question is, when they receive SNAP, does pay stubs and calculations still required?
No. All you need to do is show the SNAP benefits. But you cannot just upload the SNAP card or whatever the cards are that being used. That's not enough information. We need to actually see the benefits page that has the person's name on it. It also says how long that person's getting benefits. That matters. And then it doesn't necessarily have to say how much the benefits are, because if they have SNAP or TANF, they qualify. So I have seen where we'll put the amount of benefits on there, but I've seen letters too that don't have the amount of benefits. It just says this person qualifies for benefits and they'll be getting benefits from this point to this point. We need those two. We need the date and we need the person's name on the form for it to count. Good question.
Then you have, what if the family is undocumented and cannot provide proof of income?
The whole family is undocumented. So that means that based on Department of Labor, they don't have income, right? Because they're not putting any income into wages. So in that case, you're probably just looking at the participant's income. You're going to look at them as a family of one and put in their income, and it's because the other people do not have income. So you can get a self attestation that says that no one has income, and that could be good enough. But I think in this case, the person is probably going to be 18 or older. Just go ahead and say they're family of one, that they're an independent or dependent, independent or non-dependent, and then just calculate their income for that individual. And if they don't work, then obviously they don't have income.
If they're undocumented, does that mean that they are eligible to work in the United States? Because that's a eligibility question also, though.
Yeah, I mean, the actual
The,
participant needs to
to,
be documented. But a lot of times you have the young person is a citizen, but maybe their parents aren't. So the young person qualifies because they were born here and they got all their paperwork.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So they are documented. The parents aren't documented. Okay.
Yeah, the family's not documented, so it's like, okay, well, the family doesn't have income. It's the same as not having income because it's not being reported. These are good questions.
great questions. There are no more questions in the question box.
All right. Any other questions you guys have floating around? You want to take yourselves off mute if you can.
You should be able to remove the mute if you want to speak.
Okay. All right. And then, like I said, please continue to just email us after you look over the forms. I think you'll have maybe some questions. And one big thing I want to say about those forms is they're new. They've been changed to accommodate all the things that we talked about last year when we had those thorough discussions. Some of you may not know, but we had discussions with your leadership, going over the program and changes that need to be made. So the application has been reduced down, like it was asked. The eligibility checklist, everything has been changed. Not the procedures, but we just clarified the forms better is what we were hoping to do. So I will need feedback from you all, just letting me know if you see anything on there that's like a typo, or you see something on there that really doesn't make sense for the program, or you don't really understand it, or you think that something else that's really important is missing from the form. I really need your feedback on that, because then we will be able to update. At this point, we've done everything we can to make sure that the form is what it's supposed to be. But you, as the provider, you're giving all the services, you're going to be the one that's best equipped to give you some feedback. So thank you everyone for joining us. Today training is over for the day. Yay! So we do have tomorrow's training. You will have boss training in the morning with Denise, and then you'll follow up after lunch with the service plan and case notes training. So we'll be going over how to create that service plan. Not how to do it in box because Denise is going to go over that, but how to actually create the goals and the objectives, and how to update the plan and quarterly, and then what kinds of things you need to be putting in your case notes. All right, so everybody have a great day. I hope to see you tomorrow.